One thing that we found was that many of these devices actually have a life. They aren't something that could be utilized forever, and they aren't created to go through the rigors of reprocessing. So many task-specific procedures had to be written out based on the IFU for it, and just from how it was reprocessed, things that we would see, then calling the manufacturer to find out if this is normal and should the instrument make this kind of a noise, or if we see a spot develop on it, does that mean that the instrument has reached its life? These were all learning things for us.
From the basement to the boardroom, from ideas to innovation, you're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are pushing the sterile processing industry forward. Each week you'll encounter diverse perspectives from subject matter experts across the country and around the globe. Frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. Now, turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Johanne Benoit, Sterile Processing Manager at Fenway Health. Johanne is an agent of change. She's here to change the narrative of reprocessing in the dental industry through implementation of best practice. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Business Management with a concentration in human resourcing. She is a certified technician and member of ISHM. She's also a member of OSAP and certificate holder in dental infection prevention and control from OSAP and the Dale Foundation. Her most recent consulting venture, Rima Oris Incorporated, was founded to bring awareness, enlightenment, and aims to elevate patient safety to meet regulations and guidelines within oral healthcare settings. And Hank, I'm just going to quiz you here because the name of her consulting venture is Rima Oris. Do you know what that references?
If I were to wager an educated guess, I'm going to have to say it has something to do with oral surgery.
It's the mouth. And right. I had no idea until I looked it up. And I was actually just trying to find a web page for her consulting to learn a little bit more. And what actually came up was, the true meaning of Rima Oris. A very little known term and yet very appropriate. So good on her. She's good at social media. She might be a little good at marketing, too, because I think she nailed it with that one.
Well, we'll find out here through this interview, not only her marketing skills, and in particular her insight into social media, but also her skills in the dental setting, right? And so that's where I'm really looking forward to learning from her today.
All right. Well, we'll be right back with Johanne Benoit after a short break.
You're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Johanne Benoit, Sterile Processing Manager at Fenway Health. And Johanne, we've been really overdue for an interview around dental reprocessing because I can't tell you how many times people have said, oh, do you guys do any consulting on dental or do you have any information? And we really needed to have this conversation long before our 3-year tenure doing this podcast. So welcome to the show and thank you for helping us bring a topic that we actually haven't done yet in over 150 plus episodes.
Thank you, Justin. And thank you, Hank. Again, this is a great opportunity. It was kind of a surprise to me that I'm actually the first person to come and talk about this topic. So it is an honor.
Excellent. Well, the honor is ours, and we're going to be doing a conference at some point on this very topic. So it would be great to have you involved in that as well. As we get started, why don't you just talk a little bit about your background? I know we read the bio as we do the introduction to these podcasts, but just tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a sterile processing manager, but before I actually transitioned into healthcare, I am a business management major. I had a concentration in human resources because I am at heart a people person. I do remember having my first job out of college and being placed behind a desk with a phone and a computer. And that's all I did all day, 40 hours a week. And I said, wow, this really isn't me. I have a need to converse. I have a need to be around people. So I did a lot of different types of jobs until I was able to get a lot of experience. And so I progressed until I had the opportunity to get into management. And so with life and the different things that happen in our economy, which make us have to make different choices in life. And so I was faced with being laid off. And I would say that that would be the second time in my career where that was going to happen. I was an operations manager at the time. And I said to myself, well, I've got to make a more stable career change. And through my searching, I came upon Sterile Processing. I think it was an advertisement of some sort on Indeed, and I looked into it because it kept popping up in my searches. And so I looked into it and I said, wow, in about 6 months' time, I could do a transition into this career and I could pair it with my management skills that I already have. And so it just seemed like the right path. And it actually turned out to be a great transition. With that, I've taken on my 6 years of operational experience and I tailored it into healthcare. So I brought in a boatload of knowledge on how to manage staff, on how to interview. And it was crazy for me to come to the realization that all of my previous jobs, even the one where I worked front desk at a staffing agency, so I learned to read resumes, and recruiters would come to me and say, hey, we're looking for this type of person and we need you to find them. And I would comb hours and hours and hours and comb through resumes so that I could find the candidates, and to take that skill set of me combing through resumes and apply it when I had to develop the sterile processing department. It came in handy, to say the least.
Well, I'll tell you, your background in human resources, I wasn't aware of that before the interview. And as soon as you brought it up, I thought, what an awesome transferable skill to bring to the table. But I didn't even think about it. And you just really added detail or a specific around that, which is, now you kind of, as people are applying for positions, you already have this skill to weed through that. Because I can tell you, going through resumes is one of the most tedious, most difficult tasks to do. And you're never really sure as a manager, but the fact that you already had that, I'm sure that helps you with hiring. That's a really great skill to have. And I also like the fact that you had this operations manager experience outside of healthcare, because it's a common theme for me, but bringing best practices from other operations, other industries, other supply chains, etc., into healthcare, I think really just helps healthcare gain a different perspective. But did you find that some things worked in healthcare and some things didn't from your prior experience?
I did find that a lot of things really were applicable to healthcare. I'll give you an example. I used to oversee a building. It had 2 different levels, and I was in charge of ensuring all of the fire extinguishers get their inspections. And one thing that was crucial in my time as an operations manager overseeing this building was that I had to sit in a lot of conversations around a backflow valve. And this was very new to me. I had no idea what a backflow valve was. And so I'm sitting in meetings where the fire department is saying, well, your building's not up to code due to this backflow valve. I had to speak with manufacturers. I had to speak with engineers. I had to inform myself on compliance needs of the city. We weren't in compliance with our current system, and then how to facilitate all of that. Then I was able to take that information into the healthcare setting. So when there is an issue with a water purification system in dental, or where there is an issue with a washer, I have the skill sets where I am confident enough to speak with the technicians on certain things. It also gave me a great need to read up on what are the steps that it's going to take for them to perform a certain task, so that when I was there, I could say, this is what I've read up about this, and this is what's going to be done. Are you prepared to get this done today? So most technicians who come in to service our equipment and I'm there are really surprised that I've knowledged myself on what it's going to take for them to actually provide the service.
So, Johanne, we've got two sections of our audience, I would say, that are listening to this. And part of them, to Justin's point, they have had experience in the dental reprocessing arena. Perhaps they have worked in a small doctor's office or dentist's office clinic. Perhaps they've worked in larger facilities that just have specialty in the dental space. But then we have a large swath that have never had to deal with that in any ongoing type of service line, right? And so from these two audience perspectives, you're coming in with this operational background and insight as you described from outside of healthcare, plus now years of hands-on experience as a dental reprocessing subject matter expert. And I think the first big question, for those two audiences is what is different? If you were to line out and compare and contrast the reprocessing workflow of the dental reprocessing of instruments and the typical hospital-based sterile processing department that most of us would be familiar with, what would be the big things that would stick out as similar, and what would be the things that are, say, typically different depending on the context for dental reprocessing?
I would say that reprocessors will find that if it's a general dentistry practice, the majority of the instruments, a technician would be very familiar with how to reprocess them. The complexities in dentistry really come into play when we talk about hand pieces. I think that that's the major difference because a reprocessor will definitely have to get knowledgeable on the hand piece, how it is utilized, all the compartments or complexities of that handpiece. And so that is definitely a learning curve for reprocessors. But the majority of the instrumentation that is utilized in dentistry are scalers. They're solid all the way through, the majority of them. There isn't many instrumentation that you will have to break apart to their most basic component. So I think these would be two differences or comparisons of the instruments that you'd find in dental.
Yeah, so then in that, right, so we understand the instruments, the similarities and differences there, but I'm assuming, and I think it's a pretty good assumption here, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, but there's probably some challenges and frustrations that confront the average dental reprocessing technician. Can you speak to that? And if that is true, if there are challenges out there, what are the big ones in the industry today for these frontline dental techs?
I would say that the challenge, not only for me, but my team, was getting to know all of the very unique devices that are utilized in dentistry. The instruments are pretty straightforward, basic, where the loop for us was figuring out these devices, how they're utilized in the oral cavity, and finding out how do you reprocess this device. One thing that we found was that many of these devices actually have a life. So they aren't something that could be utilized forever, and they aren't created to go through the rigors of reprocessing. So many task-specific procedures had to be written out based on the IFU for it, just from how it was reprocessed, things that we would see, then calling the manufacturer to find out if this is normal and should the instrument make this kind of a noise, or if we see a spot develop on it, does that mean that the instrument has reached its life? These were all learning things for us to say that, all right, if the IFU doesn't state a life, but the majority of dental devices actually have a life on them, where they'll say, hey, this instrument can only be reprocessed 50 times or 1,000 times or 500 times. They don't go into specifics on anything else, but it does require for technicians to really inspect them and make out-of-the-box thinking happen to know when to place instruments out of circulation when they're not deemed safe to be utilized anymore.
Right. Well, even from the traditional sterile processing setting, tracking the life of an instrument for the few that do have limited lifespans in the hospital setting, it's a pain and it's a real challenge, especially if you're operating outside of a tracking system and you're trying to track those lives manually. And I know, from the consulting standpoint, we go into facilities all the time, and those are the devices actually that we're looking for, because we know that it's likely if there's anything that's not going to be compliant, those are the ones. That's where you're going to see dropouts and fallouts for departments. So we want to help them identify that ahead of time and then, create those processes if they have to be manual, or hopefully to work those into some kind of automated tracking system that can cue you in addition to, as you said, the inspection skill of the technician to know that, but also to have that record so that something tells the department manager, hey, this is past its 500 uses and now it needs to be replaced. I wanted to speak to, you talked about the instrument identification, being one of those challenges. Have you seen any kind of posters or mats? I'm sure you've seen those assembly table mats that companies have out for identifying and testing surgical instruments, but have you seen anything like that in use before in the dental setting?
I have not seen those utilized. In my facility, I actually, through my clinical application within the hospital setting, brought in testing material for things like Metzenbaum scissors, ensuring through in-services that all techs have the knowledge that they need in order to, the example of a needle holder in dentistry, if the procedure requires for sutures, so you would see a needle holder and our techs would have to be knowledgeable on the function of a needle holder. So this was something new brought in. Our dental staff didn't even understand that we would test scissors not only for sharpness, but for function. This was something I actually had to demonstrate and show how we would know whether or not this instrument needs to be sent out for repair, or what are the things that need to be looked at or assessed for function.
Right. Well, point of information here from your comment on repair. For anyone who's listening that has oversight over a reprocessing area in the dental setting, you do need to be on a preventative maintenance program for those instruments, just like you would for any other type surgical instrument, even if they do have limited.
Don't get me started, Hank.
Even if they have limited life, it does not mean they can last 500 uses if they're not taken care of. So yeah, Justin, if you want to weigh in on that, now's your time.
I'll just say, I could not emphasize preventive maintenance enough. Having a plan and being able to, especially if you have a tracking system, utilize that. It's just going to be much more successful. Maybe a preventive maintenance and utilizing a tracking system and utilization episode is in order. I don't want to derail this one, but you're absolutely right, Hank, and you're touching on, one of my favorite topics.
So, Johanne, if you were to approach these challenges then, as you lay them out, challenges with identification, challenges with tracking and the life of instruments and all those as you described, if you were to build a reprocessing department from scratch, what would be the critical tools and technologies that you would advise to include in that department to drive dental quality in the reprocessing workflow?
I would say a critical tool that is needed, believe it or not, the load control gun. There's a lot of writing on peel pouches, the wraps with just numbers. This is what I found before sterile processing actually became in charge of reprocessing for dental in my facility. No one even knew that the load control gun existed. So this provided a great way of tracking all of the necessary information and capturing all of that without physically having to write that. Another critical tool I thought was great was the SonoCheck. Mm-hmm. A lot of ultrasonics sold in the dental industries, IFU will say, you want to check efficacy with a foil test. This foil test is so subjective. You're looking at a sheet of foil, and to one person, you're looking for divots. And another person is like, I don't know if these are enough divots, and the IFUs weren't too clear. Some will say, put it in for a minute, dip it in there at a certain level. It required so much work on the user end, so many levels for error, that it just was more work to test the machine than needed. With the SonoCheck, you are able to see a color change so that you can assess whether the machine machine is actually working correctly.
Yeah, Joanne, that tinfoil test is very subjective, and so much so that my understanding, and I heard you describe multiple different ones, but my understanding was that the tinfoil had to be completely dissolved from the cavitation process. So I had heard something completely different than what you had heard. So very interesting, and I'm sure the instructions for use didn't say exactly what should happen to the tinfoil. So I agree, moving to a more standardized and easily readable product to test the ultrasonic is pretty critical.
From an experience that we had, we moved to a larger capacity ultrasonic. I think we moved from a 3-gallon ultrasonic to a 6-gallon ultrasonic, and it was a higher powered ultrasonic, and both required the foil test. The higher powered ultrasonic, the moment the foil went into that, it burrowed through the foil and made such very small, fine dust particles into the ultrasonic, which then became a problem because as that goes down into the drain, it would come back up. It was so fine and powdery. Yeah, we found that it would come back up and end up on the instruments. It is not what we wanted. But, through the trial and error of this, I worked close with our infection preventist where I said, I need a policy written on utilizing the sonocheck. And that's what we're going to do here. This is how we're going to train our techs in order to have a process that would not require all of this work on the end of the user, because I could not risk having foil end up on top of instruments to elongate the reprocessing part for us on our end.
No, absolutely not. So, Joanne, that's great because, we're talking a lot about the tools and technology, and the two examples you gave us might seem very basic, but you know what else seems very basic? Training and education. And yet we know that that is always such a constant need. And it's really one of the reasons that Beyond Clean and this podcast exists. So where do you think the training and education opportunities lie for frontline dental technicians?
I believe that they lie first in services with the manufacturers and their reps. It was important for me to have my staff obtain their knowledge through that first route of the representatives of that company. They come in with a lot of information about the product based on the in-service that the technicians received. Should I feel that there was a need for more or additional information, I would go to the product manufacturer website. Some had no information, where others had a boatload of information, videos. Some of them had like CE courses that technicians could take. Webinars became the it thing amidst COVID, which provided a boatload of opportunity for techs to attend webinars where product manufacturers were creating content to get awareness out amidst COVID. Here are better ways to do things. If you were doing things this way, this would be a better choice to make, and why, and how to utilize their products. So COVID actually really gave us the opportunity, not only with, having a lesser load with procedures that are happening, but it provided us the great opportunity to educate ourselves more on the instruments and the devices and how manufacturers intend for us to utilize them and reprocess them.
Now, Johanne, speaking of tools and webinars and COVID, I can't let you leave this interview without a conversation around how you've been leveraging your social media presence to provide education to these dental audiences, right? Because honestly, I know we've been connected for a while on LinkedIn, but over the last couple of months, I saw it come flooding out of your social media pages, all of this dental education. And it was around the same time, as you said, that all these webinars, started releasing. But you're doing things a little differently and a little more creatively, perhaps we'll say, than some manufacturers out there do them. So I wonder if you could help us kind of wrap this interview with giving perspective on why you decided to do that, number one, but number two, how you see that as a tool to complement and come alongside all the other information that's out there that is accessible today for these frontline techs.
So I want to start off with the second question that you just posed. I believe that technology is definitely the next wave. Soon it will take over everything. Technology is always and forever changing. And believe it or not, the majority of my content I create on my cell phone. I don't even ever sit at a computer. I create it on my cell phone.
That's great.
There is an incredible amount of apps that are specifically created so that you can make what are called memes. And so most people know memes as a funny, I think they have like funny little slogans or witty things that are attached to a picture. And so what I've done is I can take a picture and find educational topics that I want to focus in on with a picture. They come from social media pages of people within the dental industry. And as they make these posts, which come with phenomenal pictures, I'm able to say, okay, I'm going to utilize this picture and add in the information that they may not be aware of. And so my whole point is to provoke thought and to create awareness around something not only for the dental healthcare professional, but it's also for the patients. It's also for, I think about friends, I think about family, I think about coworkers. I'm thinking about all of these people that are in my current network who they have additional networks and can say, wow, did you know? I just learned this quick thing off of a post that I've made on Instagram. And the great thing about utilizing Instagram are hashtags. And every hashtag, if you were to press on it, anything and everything that utilized that hashtag would come up. And so it's going to generate a different feed. You'd have different people just adding you based on the content that you create. There's so many things that you can do. The majority of my content is created at around 5-6 o'clock in the morning. It's just a calm, quiet time where I'm actually able to just play with these apps on my phone.
All right, Johanne. So as we wrap, I know you answered the second half of Hank's question, but I'm going to come back to the first half because we learned a lot about you at the start of the interview, and this will really be a great way to wrap it up. But why did you choose to do that?
I chose to choose the different social media platforms because I really do have a passion to share the information that I learn and bring awareness to a lot of things that the majority of people are almost oblivious to. I think the most profound conversation I had with a friend was when I go in to get any kind of procedure or service within the healthcare industry, it's my assumption that they know what they're doing. I'm in great hands. And that really kind of struck a chord with me where I said, what if they actually don't know what they're doing? What if the healthcare professional doesn't know? And I said, what way can I point out some things? One thing I was really tired of is a problem would arise and I would be able to bring an issue to a committee meeting and the issue would just stay at the table. Everyone would feel unempowered to act or come up with solutions. The assumption was we need someone who is an expert or a professional in this so that we would know what to do and take our cues. And I said to myself, well, why not any of us get knowledgeable on what to do, research, ask around, and find out, well, what do other people do or what do other places do, and work on taking that problem and developing a solution around what actually exists for it. It's a better attempt than just not doing anything at all. And so my goal through my posts is to inspire others as well as myself to say that for every problem, there is a solution. And maybe the solution is going to come from someone who's read a post, someone who's seen a post and it strikes a chord with them and they feel empowered to make a change. And the more of us who are empowered to make a change can come together, it's limitless what we can do together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we completely relate to that for obvious reasons and part of the reason we found you. And I think the other thing that's great about social media is you don't need to write a very long article that tries to get somebody inspired all at once, because sometimes people will read articles and that's important too. But maintaining that inspirational momentum, like you're saying, taking it and putting it out there in bite-sized chunks to just keep it in front of everybody is such a successful strategy. strategy to keeping that progress and that forward momentum. So great job on the interview. Thank you for bringing a little insider knowledge into the world of dental reprocessing today. Great job.
Thank you.
That was Johanne Benoit, Sterile Processing Manager at Fenway Health. And Hank, I know we said it several times, but this is the first episode that we've ever done focused on dental. And while there are some unique differences, as you know, even on a very recent interview, I think it was last week, we spoke with Jason Unger, who is in the Middle East. And as much as things are different, so many things are the same.
Right. Well, cut us a break. There's a lot of topics to cover in the sterile processing industry. So it took us a while to get to dental, but, we're here and I think we're going to be here for a while. This was the first conversation from an insider, right? But there's a lot of complexity in the dental space, as Johanne mentioned. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to bring additional voices in to look at this from other angles and perspectives, just like we do with everything else, and equip these frontline personnel with the tools, the insight, the critical thinking that they need to make those decisions that keep patients safe. That's why we do this podcast. That's why we do everything else that we do at Beyond Clean. And as someone who is afraid to go to the dentist, I think it's in my best interest and probably the best interest of everyone else to keep pumping out these kinds of educational opportunities for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just the basic cleaning. You've seen so many articles in the industry, news articles talking about failures in reprocessing. There was one actually in my hometown, and they spread hepatitis C to a number of patients. So you just know that this is a huge opportunity for improvement because of the variability in different clinics, in different settings. And so absolutely can't wait till we do a conference on dental. And I think the other thing I'll just mention about Johanne that I love is that she's engaging in social media. And like we talked about with her as we were closing out, stay encouraged, keep it up. And I think social media is where it's at. I think it's how we keep the attention on the desire and the passion to improve. So it's great to have her as a part of that social media community. But that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, or you can download our smartphone application for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.